What's up guys? Today I'm going to go ahead and show you how to brew your very first beer. Let's get to it.
Alright, quick disclaimer. Even though I try not to go painstakingly through every little step, this video is a bit long, so I have provided time codes in the description. Use those to jump ahead to specific parts of the video.
Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and show you today how to brew your first beer. We're going to go over equipment, we're going to go over some tips and tricks, and we're just going to go ahead and homebrew. So first off, we're going to go ahead and do our very first homebrew with a 1-gallon beer kit. Now you might already have a kit, and it might be a 5-gallon kit. That tends to be the standard. But if you haven't purchased anything yet, I'll show you right now what you need essentially to do it for the very first time. Now, if you're doing it for the very first time, you might be more afraid to spend a lot of money. A lot of beer kits out there are over $100. So this kit here is going to be about $35 to $40 depending on what you purchase. Most likely you already have a brew kettle, aka just a pot. And you probably have a thermometer. If you don't, purchase one. I'll link it all in the description below. All of this will be linked. This one we had with some cooking stuff, so just using that again is fine. A brush to clean with, and just some other stuff that you might have just lying around at home. You don't need to do spring water from the store. You could use your own tap water. But for the very first time, just because you don't know what's really going to happen, I just recommend buying a gallon from the store. Now, let's get to the equipment you probably don't have lying around. First off is your beer kit. This one is an $18 beer kit from Craft-a-Brew. They don't include everything from what I can gather. I haven't opened this up yet. I think that's just to lower cost. But yeah, 18 bucks for a beer kit isn't too bad, especially a 1-gallon one. You can use Northern Brewer or Brewer's Best, but those ones alone are about $40 to $50. So starting off, I recommend this one for 18 bucks. You'll need a bung and an airlock. This is a 3-piece airlock. They tend to be cheaper by like 10-15 cents than an S-lock. They're both going to accomplish the same exact thing. The only difference is this one's 3-piece. It has the top, sort of this bubbler piece, and the main airlock. They say 3-piece because of this guy, the cap, but you don't necessarily need the cap, and that goes for the S-lock as well. You should have a sanitized solution in here, and we'll do that in this video, that any airborne bacteria or wild yeast can't get into the beer, but it allows the CO2 to come out. But this is essential, so you need one of these. You need a fermentation vessel. So I have a 1-gallon jug I just cleaned with soap and water. This one happens to have a temperature sticker on there to help monitor. It's not perfect, but it's nice. Again, I'll link this in the description. And then I have some food grade tubing so I can transfer the beer from the fermentation vessel to its carbonation vessel. For you, that could be some bottles, or I'm going to do things a little different, but we'll wait till we get to that point.
Check the description down below for bottle caps, the capper, bottles, and stainless steel growler as options to store your homebrew.
So now that we've gone over all of the equipment, let's look a little closer at the beer recipe kit. Cool. Alright, so I highly recommend when you first get your recipe kit, do not plan on brewing that day. You might not know what's in here, what might be missing. I would say get this and immediately look into it to make sure you understand what you're going to need for the brew. So this is going to be our first time opening this kit. In my case, it's okay if we're missing something because I have extra yeast, extra priming sugar, extra hops laying around, so not too big of a deal if there's something missing, but you know, let's go ahead and see what's in this kit. All right, so we got a little note in here that just says leave a review. So looking at it right off the bat, we have 2 packages of hops. One is marked bittering and one is marked flavor aroma, and it has a how to use section. Since this is a bittering hop, if you see that in your instructions on any of your kits, what that means is that's going to go in at the very beginning. If you have a set of hops that are used for flavor or aroma, those are going to go in at the end of the boil. So we have a yeast packet. This one's pretty interesting because it says add whole packet. So if you get a beer kit that's 1 gallon and it has a traditional packet of yeast, you want to use about half of that packet. But this one was curated specifically for 1 gallon, so that's pretty nice. We have a packet of sanitizer. And what kind of sanitizer is it? 1 step, no rinse. So it's like a Star San sanitizer, which is really nice that they put that in the kit. It looks like we have some specialty grains. We have our cheesecloth of sorts to hold the specialty grains so we can drain the sugars from it. And we have a dried malt extract. You might have a liquid extract, so whether you have dry malt, liquid malt, or both even, doesn't really matter. And that's it, so there's no instructions in there. So that's interesting. Usually a kit will come with instructions. That's okay, we know what to do. We kind of have some minor instructions in here. But you know, like that's why we're doing this video, so we can see how to brew a beer. If you have a kit that has no instructions, that's okay. It's going to be a little scary, a little confusing, but in general, the instructions are pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure our equipment's clean. We're going to boil this for 60 minutes. Since we know that this is bittering and this is flavor aroma, we know when to add it. The bittering is going to go in for the entire 60 minutes and the aroma is going to go in at different times. Luckily for us, these actually tell us what times to put, so we don't have instructions, but we can do that pretty easily. Specialty grains, if you have them, usually it's going to be about 20 minutes of steeping at a temperature of 155 degrees Fahrenheit to 165. You don't really want to go over 165 because then you'll start getting some astringency and some other flavors that you won't enjoy. With this kit, we don't have instructions, so we don't know what the original gravity or the final gravity are. If you have another kit that talks about that, I would say just don't worry about it right now. For your first one, we want to actually focus more on hitting the exact amount of liquid. So for a 1 gallon kit, we're going to go ahead and pour 1 gallon in here and mark it off so that we make sure that at the end of the brew day, we hit that same mark of liquid. That'll ensure that we're as close to the original gravity that we wanted. So for this kit, we don't know where we're supposed to go. We could determine the alcohol level, but for an IPA like this, we're going to shoot for 5 to 6% ABV. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, don't worry about that for your first time. It's not that big of a deal. If you do have the equipment to figure out the alcohol content, I say go for it. The biggest issue I see with people doing that is that they check the gravity over and over and over and over again, which allows oxygen and other things in the air like bacteria or wild yeast to get into it. So we're not going to do that. If you're watching this video and you're like, when are we going to check the ABV? We're not in this first time. Not going to worry about it at all. We're just going to shoot for that 1 gallon amount. So to do that, to mark off that 1 gallon, we're going to go ahead and take this 1 gallon of drinking water and pour it in here. Now, if you don't have that, you might have something else at home that you can figure out what a gallon is and you can fill that up. But because I'm using the spring water and I already know this is a gallon, I'm just going to use that. Now, if you do purchase the 1 gallon of drinking water, you're not really going to use just this. You're going to probably use more like 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons because water is going to evaporate as you're boiling. So don't be too concerned about that. Use your tap water, it's fine. If anything, you're kind of already used to that flavor, so it's not going to really do too much. If you have really, really hard water or bad water, I'd say buy 2 gallons of drinking water. We're going to do a mixture of the drinking water and some tap water because I'm not too concerned about that. Alright, so we can see that the 1 gallon mark is right here at the neck. So we're going to go ahead and mark it. That's exactly the amount of liquid we want at the end of the boil. Like I said, as I was pouring this, that there's going to be some evaporation. So once you take, and there's going to be some stuff we're going to leave behind in the kettle as we're getting it into this fermentation vessel. And the problem with that is it's going to be a lot lower, so we just want to add water to the end at that level. All right, since we have that, we're gonna go ahead and make our sanitizer next. Okay, so I've poured some of that drinking water in here and the rest back into the 1 gallon. We'll add it later. And we're gonna use just regular water to create our sanitizer. The sanitization packet says half packet per gallon of water. The reason why you don't wanna add too much sanitizer to it is because it gets filmy and sticky, and it actually is gonna add flavor to your beer, even though this is a no rinse solution. Just kinda eyeball it. You can be a little over a half packet, that's fine. You just don't want it to be too much. If you're a little under, that's fine too. It's not a big deal. The reason why we're gonna do this in the fermentation vessel is so that we can sanitize the vessel, as well as put it aside in another vessel to save for later, because you can save it. I like to put it in a little spray bottle, because you just need to get contact with the surface. You don't have to have it fill up. So we're gonna go ahead and fill this up with water. I'll be right back. All right, as you can see, I filled the vessel up to 1 gallon with the sanitization fluid off screen and actually in the sink, because as you notice, there's a lot of foam. The foam is really good, but the problem is as you're filling up the vessel, it's gonna overflow with foam, so do it in a sink so that it just overflows into the sink and you don't create a mess. We're gonna go ahead and put most of it into this other one that I have laying around. If you don't have a jug of any sort, that's fine. You can put it in a bunch of different things. I have a little spray bottle that I'm going to fill up. Don't be afraid of it touching. It's a no rinse solution, which just means that it's not going to cause harm to you. It's not toxic. You can pretty much add it to anything and everything. You can go ahead and sanitize your brew kettle if you want, but quite honestly, you don't have to, because as you're brewing, that heat is going to actually sanitize the liquid as well as anything else it comes into contact with. I like to give it a good little shake, get some of that sanitization solution in there. I'm actually going to leave a little bit in there like this as we're brewing, just to keep it sanitized. You can save your packet. If your kit doesn't come with sanitization solution like this one did, I recommend buying Star San online. Even if you don't homebrew again, it's really good. It'll sanitize anything, and it's a no-rinse solution. So if you're cleaning things for your children or anything like that, cooking utensils, anything like that to sanitize, you can use this. So I'll link that down below. So now we want to get some other things sanitized for brew day. We're going to get our bung, our 3-piece airlock, and so let's go ahead and add some of that solution to this. Again, this is all the stuff that's going to come into contact with the beer after we are done brewing, so we want to sanitize it. Anything that it comes into contact while it's boiling, it's going to get sanitized by the boil, so we're not going to be concerned about that right away. So we have all our equipment, we're ready to go, we've got our sanitizer going, we've got all the things we need. I have no instructions. I'm sure there are some online, but I'm going to show you that you really don't need that. As long as you have some basic information, like in this case, the bittering and aroma hops, then we should be good to go. So let's get to it.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and start off by getting our water up to temperature. We are shooting for 155 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. We want to get our cheesecloth or filtering bag ready for the specialty grains. We're going to pour the specialty grains directly into the bag. Don't be afraid to just cover it so you don't lose any, and make sure to pour it over the pot so that if anything gets through the bag, it goes into the pot. We don't mind a little bit of the grains in there. Go ahead and place the bag into the pot. You can use this trick if you like to keep the handle out of the water so it doesn't get too hot when you need to extract it. And we're shooting for 20 minutes. To keep the temperature right, it might get too hot or cold, so you want to keep it within that 155, 165 range. You can move the pot on and off the burner to help with that. Alright, we're coming to the end of the 20 minutes, and so we're going to extract the bag. We want to make sure that all of the liquid and sugar from the grain bag is drained. So kind of just lift it above and let all that liquid drain out of the bag. Make sure not to squeeze it as much as you can, because you're going to squeeze out some astringency from the grain. So just let it lightly drain. Alright, so this is funny. I kind of not paying attention as I'm starting to do some things. And I dropped the bag. Oh, oh, that's awesome. Try not to do that. You're going to make a mess. And you have to remember that that liquid is sugary, so it's sticky. Luckily for me, it was just a little bit. The splash looked really big, but most of it went back into the pot. I recommend cleaning it up as soon as possible after draining the liquids and starting to get that liquid up to boiling temperature. As you can see here, I did things a little smarter to drain it. Yeah, just clean it up right away. It's really sticky. I got lucky. It's not too bad. It just took a little bit of wiping. That's gonna happen. Where you really don't want things to go sour is when you add the malt to the liquid and then you get a boil over, because that is a mess you don't want to deal with. This is probably going to be the longest wait that you have during the boiling process, is getting it to boil. Depending on how much headspace you have in the pot and how much liquid is in the pot. In this case, it was rather quick because we're just dealing with a gallon, and this is about a quarter of a gallon. So we're going to go ahead and add the bittering hops. This is going to be in the brew kettle for 60 minutes total. And we're going to go ahead and do a stop clock to check at 30 minutes. But this one's going to be 60 minutes total. When you first pour it in, just be careful that it doesn't boil over. All of a sudden, it's going to start creating these reactions that tend to rise in the pot. In this case, it's not so bad, so we didn't have too much of a problem there. I like to move the hops around. You want to get as much surface area of the hops touching liquid to get all those alpha acids out. Another tip is to get that rolling boil. This is where proteins and other things react to the temperature, and you want some good proteins for head retention later for your beer. So I highly recommend just keeping this up. You could have a soft boil, but if you have that strong rolling boil, that's great. I also recommend throwing the extra water you have in the freezer to cool it off, so when we are at the end of the boil and we need to cool it down, you can go ahead and add that and it will cool it down quicker. Alright, we added a little bit of dry malt extract in there, just a little bit for now. Continue to make sure that it doesn't boil over. We're about to hit that 30-minute mark. And when we do, we're going to add the first amount of the aroma hops, and we're going to add some more of the dry malt extract. Okay, so as I'm pouring the dry malt extract, I kind of noticed this is quite a bit, and we need enough liquid to drown the extract, and there's just not enough. And if we add more, then we won't have any room left in our pot. So I just kind of add about a quarter. And I start thinking, well, you know, all we need to do for this is really just boil it for about 15 minutes. So not too big of a deal. The 60 minutes is really for the hops. I recommend doing at least 15 minutes of any extract, and the reason for that is just to sanitize it. We also added the extract later on in the process as to not get too dark of a color. That sugar starts to caramelize if it is touching the bottom of the pot for too long. So we want a lighter color, so we're just going to go ahead and add it later on. Alright, so we're adding some of those aroma hops. This is at 30 minutes. Still keeping that rolling boil. Also, right now is a great time to start getting the ice bath ready so that when we can add the pots to it to cool down the liquid. And now we're going to go ahead and add that last amount. It's about half at the 2-minute mark, according to the instructions on the packet. We're at the end of our 60 minutes finally. And we need to start cooling down that wort as soon as possible. I forgot to mention, as soon as we added all of these pieces together, we created wort. I'm sure you've smelt it in the breweries you've hung out at. If you have gone there, it'll smell exactly the same. We are cooling down this liquid as soon as possible by creating a whirlpool. As you can see, the vapor is coming out a lot quicker. Just keep stirring, keep stirring. And while this is happening, we can go ahead and add some of that cool water we had in the freezer to help bring down the temperature a bit. Alright, we're going to add the worts in the pots to the ice bath, and we're just going to monitor the temperature. Alright, so we came to a temperature where I felt comfortable adding it to the glass, which was a lot cooler. And as you can see, it's foaming up. We're getting a good oxygen amount in the wort, and you want that for the yeast. Yeast is respiratory, so it needs oxygen so that it can consume the sugars and then exhale CO2 and alcohol. This will also take a while. You want to get it as cool as possible. You'll see that the water around it heats up quite a bit, so I'm trying to get as much of that cool water on the surface area of the carboy, this 1 gallon jug. And we're about to hit that temperature, and as we do, we're going to go ahead and close up the top of the carboy with the airlock so we don't have to worry about anything entering. Awesome, so we've hit about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. We are going to ferment at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so we want to be a couple degrees underneath that fermentation temperature so that the yeast doesn't get shocked when we add it. According to this packet, we're going to add the whole thing. Awesome, so now we have a little bit of action going on, and it's fermenting. Oh wow, fermenting way too much. So there wasn't enough headspace to handle the amount of fermentation that this yeast has. I have done it in a gallon where it's just done a little bubbling, but this one is just out of control, which is both awesome but problematic. We're going to go ahead and create a makeshift blow-off by adding our extra sanitation liquid to a jar and using some of that tubing we purchased to blow off into the jar. Now the tubing should be, if you purchased it from the description I have below, it's going to fit into that bung pretty nicely. And what you want to do is just clean up the mess. You saw that I had it in a bucket. I highly recommend using a bucket for fermentation or anything for that matter, so you don't get anything dirty. You can also see that I have sanitization liquid in the spray bottle. That is super helpful as well. I just keep spraying it to make sure that nothing comes into contact that could potentially infect the beer. And we'll see in a little while that infection is possible, no matter what. I highly recommend also cleaning up any mess beforehand before putting the beer back in. As you can see, I don't have anything closing up the top. But if you notice very closely, the krausen is that foam popping up there is pouring out. That is due to the CO2. We're just going to go ahead and make sure everything is sanitized still. Yeah, that krausen is just coming out. Nothing's really getting in at this point. And what we're going to do is going to go ahead and take the tubing and put it into the bung. Just put it enough to where it doesn't easily pop out. I'm getting my bucket ready to put it back in. And one last spray and clean up before we go ahead and put the bung back on. And there we go, we have our blow-off tube. Now, normally I would do this at the beginning if you're nervous, but I wanted this to sort of happen just in case so I could show you how to do it in a serious event of having such crazy fermentation. Look at that, that's awesome. But yeah, fermentation, it's sometimes, without knowing what kind of yeast it is, we don't know what's going to happen. I've had it where it's been fine with a simple 3-piece airlock like we did at the beginning. I've also had to do a blow-off like this. I'm glad this happened so I can show you that even though it did happen, we can still make some good homebrew. And let's take a closer look to see how that yeast is turning in that beer. So if you look very closely, you'll see little white specks just going about. That is the yeast just going nuts. That's pretty awesome. This is why I highly recommend using a clear vessel for fermentation, just so you can see it. It's so much fun. This camera is not doing it justice whatsoever. I try to get a good shot, but it's just hard because it's so light, and it really just takes you seeing it for yourself to see the reaction that's happening with this really cool microorganism. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and put this back in the bucket and throw it into the closet to finish fermenting. And after letting it sit for about 3 weeks, we have beer. Whoa, if you look in closely, you can see that there was an infection. That is all mold. That is crazy, but it's also outside of the sanitization liquid, so I'm not too concerned. We're going to go ahead and get our extraction tubing sanitized. You can't see right here, but I'm spraying it directly into the tube, and I'm going to let it drain through the tube completely. I'm also just hoping that the beer's fine, but it looked fine. It was just outside of the sanitization liquid and jar that it looked bad. So it didn't make it through the liquid, and it didn't go up through the tubing and back into the beer, which in my opinion is a complete success. But as you can see, I'm just making sure everything that's going to come in contact with the beer is sanitized. Using a growler just makes life a lot simpler than using a ton of bottles, but I will show you how to fill a bottle as well. So let's check on the beer. Let's make sure it's actually okay. Yeah, smells great, looks great, looks like beer. You can see that yeast cake at the bottom. And here is that mold, that infection. I highly recommend just tossing everything you came into contact with if this happens to you. Trying to clean that is, you don't know what's going to be left behind, what's going to survive if you try to reuse this to make beer again. Just go ahead and toss it, get rid of it. That's like $2 right there, it's not too big of a deal. We can clean the jar, that'll be fine, but the tubing, the plastic, all that good stuff, just get rid of it. Make sure you clean and sanitize your hands again. We're going to start transferring the beer, and so anything that could potentially come into contact, we want to make sure is sanitized. All right, so we're going to go ahead and fill the bottle first. So put some sanitization liquid in there. And we're going to use a fizz drop to add CO2. What these are little sugar tablets that, while the yeast are in suspension in the beer, it's going to add some food, as it were, for the yeast to consume and then shoot out some CO2. So that's how we're going to add CO2 to our beers. We're going to let the yeast do it. As you saw earlier when things were going nuts, CO2 comes from the yeast very easily. Alright, now so we're going to add our tubing to the beer. Put it in as best as you can so as to not have it fall out, we're going to actually use our hand to help suck on the tubing so that our mouths don't come in contact with the tubing or potentially the beer. So grab it about halfway in the hand and suck through your hand, and you should start seeing it coming through. Stay at the same level as the fermentation vessel. Lift it up. If it starts coming out, it won't go higher than what it is at, as you can see. Add the tubing to the beer. And to just control the flow, you can lower it and raise it at your own discretion. As you can see in the background, the beer is flowing. Now it's not flowing. It's flowing. We're going to go ahead and slowly get it up to the very top. And when it gets to the top, we can go ahead and remove the tubing. That should have about... We want a little bit of headspace because of that CO2 that's going to be coming out. We don't want the bottle to explode. But with these fizz drops, they just provide the right amount of sugar so that you don't get any crazy explosions from your bottles. If you're worried about bottles, definitely use a growler because it's actually going to handle higher pressure, so it's not going to have any explosions, and you can reuse it just to pick up beer over at your local brewery as well. We also want to make sure the tubing doesn't suck up any of that yeast cake. If the beer hangs out on the yeast cake for too long, you'll get more of a soapy taste, and you don't want that. You can go ahead and tip your vessel over a little bit to get some more of that liquid at the level of the tubing. It's going to continue to just suck up the beer until the very end. Alright, now first we're going to go ahead and cap our bottles. So if you're doing bottles, this is how you would do it. You just get your capper, your cap, push down on the capper, and there you go. You have a beer that's ready to finish carbonating, and do the same to the growler. The growler is going to take about 11 to 12 of those fizz drops. Make sure they sit and carbonate for about 3 to 4 weeks in the same temperature as they fermented. And after that 4 weeks, we can open it up.
And here we are, about a month later. It just so happens we are at the end of the second day of the quarantine here in Las Vegas. And so this couldn't have happened at the best moment to have something to look forward to. The times are a little tough right now, mostly because there's a lot of fear and stuff like that. But what else I've also seen is a lot of people reaching out to each other and doing some really good stuff for each other. So I want to go ahead and encourage you to keep on doing that. So I'm really looking forward to having this beer right now. This is the IPA. As you saw in the video, we had a couple of setbacks, a couple of blumbers. The infection at the sanitizer, at the airlock that we created was pretty cool. It smelled terrible. The beer smelled fine, and so I went ahead and carbonated it. So it's looking good right now. I gave the bottle that I made to a friend for his birthday, so I didn't open that up. So I just opened up here from the growler that you saw me pour it into. I basically took about 11 or 12 of those fizz bombs and put that in here. I wanted it to be well carbonated. The best way to do carbonation, in my opinion, is to do forced carbonation with a CO2 tank. However, I wanted to show you that you can get really good results with just those fizz bombs. They're super cheap. They're not as cheap as priming sugar, but the margin there is not that crazy either. So let's go ahead and take a look at this beer. It's surprisingly clear, especially since I did not cold crash it. A little hazy. Some of that haze is probably the temperature of the beer against the glass, but for the most part you can see through it. Not as clean as a lager, but for an IPA, very clean. It's got strong malt characteristics. I would attribute that to all the dry malt extract. There was quite a bit, in my opinion. I've never dealt with that much in the past, but I've also dealt with both dry malt and liquid malts. But for a 1 gallon beer, it was quite a bit. At least it seemed like it, and it smells like it too. A little piney. Definitely get the hop characteristic. I think the malt is overpowering the hops a little bit. But it smells great. It definitely doesn't... If I was to give this to somebody, they would have no clue that there was a crazy amount of infection and bacteria and all that stuff near the end of its fermentation, for sure. If I probably would have showed them that, they wouldn't have wanted to try this beer. So let's go in for a sip. That's good. That's good. Definitely malty. But for a single hop variation, this is great. If I didn't mention before, this is a single hop beer. As you saw in the video, there was the bittering hops at the beginning and half of an addition of aroma hops midway, and then another half 15 minutes before the end. It tastes good, but yeah, a little more malty than I'd like. But that's a success. That is a successful beer. I think if I took this anywhere, no one would realize that this was homemade. Very good. Okay, so now the review on the beer kit. So, clean beer, doesn't taste too bad. I don't think they've dialed down the recipe, and to be honest, I think that's on purpose to save some money. I mean, there's a reason why you can get this kit for $18. Like I said, Craft-a Beer is about $18, whereas Northern Brewery or Brewer's Best is going to be about $40 to $45 for a 1 gallon kit. Now, that all being said, for $18 for your first homebrew, I highly recommend this. You're going to be amazed that you can make your own beer, and you'll start getting your feet wet in a way that'll help you ask questions and go forward and do other things and really enjoy it. So let's summarize everything for you, and the top tips I have for you. Stay clean. Always stay clean. Anything coming into contact with the beer, anything that will touch and reside with the beer for a long period of time, for example, the growler or the bottle. Make sure if you're doing a transfer like I did, where I didn't use a racking cane or a siphon pump, that when you're using your mouth to suck on the hose, make sure it's touching your hand and that the hose is on the other end. Create a good seal that way. Not the most ideal way to do it, however, I think it worked out pretty well. Also, if you don't know how the yeast is going to go, I say start out with a blow-off tube, because you might run into the same situation as I did, which is it blew the airlock off the top. I had to go fit off a blow-off tube after the fact, so I lost some beer for sure. I would say my 1 gallon, realistically, poured out is going to be more like 3/4 of a gallon, but that's okay. So anyone can make this beer. Anyone. And you saw me mess up and screw up. Just keep clean, make sure you ferment well, lean back and crack open a homebrew, and you'll enjoy it. Salud.